1.3 million square feet, over 150 stores, 5 anchor department stores, parking for 7,500 cars. At its peak, Rolling Acres Mall was the most visited shopping center in all of Northeast Ohio, a place so alive that on a Saturday afternoon you could circle the lot for 20 minutes and still not find a spot. Today, every square inch of it is gone. How does a place that held an entire city's life inside its walls become nothing more than a concrete slab and a memory? Long before anyone broke ground on Romig Road, Akron, Ohio ran on rubber. For the better part of a century, the city's identity was inseparable from the black, pungent material that rolled off its factory floors by the ton. Goodyear, Firestone, BF. Goodrich, General Tire, the Big Four of American rubber manufacturing all called Akron home. At the height of the boom, roughly 75,000 people in the city worked in rubber factories. You could smell the industry in the air, a thick, acrid sweetness that clung to clothes and hair and front porches. Fathers left the house before dawn and came home with carbon black under their fingernails. Mothers cashed paychecks that could buy a house, a car, a middle-class life that their own parents had never imagined possible. By 1960, Akron's population had swelled to just over 290,000, its all-time peak. The rubber capital of the world was not a slogan, it was a fact. And then the ground shifted. The trouble started quietly in the 1960s, but by the 70s it was impossible to ignore. The French tire company Michelin had developed the radial tire, and in 1968 Consumer Reports gave radials its seal of approval. They lasted longer, steered better, delivered superior gas mileage. American manufacturers, still tooled for older bias-ply designs, were caught flat-footed. Then the oil embargo of 1973 sent gas prices spiraling, and suddenly consumers wanted tires that stretched every gallon, not the ones Akron was built to produce. Foreign competition intensified. Union demands collided with corporate cost-cutting. The factories, some of them decades old and inefficient, became liability instead of assets. Between 1975 and 1982, one by one, the Big Four pulled the plug on passenger tire production in Akron. In 7 years, the economic engine that had powered the city for nearly a century flatlined. Tens of thousands of jobs vanished. The population began a long, slow bleed, a decline that would eventually cut the city by a third. Neighborhoods that had thrived on factory wages started to hollow out. Barberton, Kenmore, West Akron. These were blue-collar communities built around the assumption that there would always be work. That assumption was dying. It was into this world, a world of simultaneous collapse and stubborn optimism, that Rolling Acres Mall was born. The idea had been percolating since 1964. Forest City Enterprises, a Cleveland-based real estate firm, and a local Akron businessman named Richard Buchholzer had already partnered to build Chapel Hill Mall on the city's north side in 1967. They saw potential in Akron's southwestern corridor, where working-class families from Barberton, Kenmore, and the inner-city neighborhoods of West Akron and Lane Wooster formed a dense, underserved market. Between 1964 and 1966, they conducted site studies on a 260-acre parcel of land along Romig Road. The studies confirmed what they suspected. Several major department store chains had expressed interest in the area. There was demand. There was land. All they needed was the will to build. Not everyone was convinced. Akron's mayor at the time, Edward Erickson, publicly warned that adding a third enclosed mall to the Akron market would devastate the downtown department stores that still served as the commercial heart of the city. It was a warning rooted in legitimate concern. Downtown Akron was already losing foot traffic to the suburbs, and a massive new shopping center on the city's edge could accelerate that drain. But the developers pressed forward. In 1971, Buchholzer secured a $500,000 permit to begin clearing and grading the Romig Road site. The city, despite its mayor's misgivings, budgeted $1.1 million for highway and sewer improvements along Romig Road to handle the traffic the mall would bring. The bet was placed. Akron was going to build its way into the future, even as its past was crumbling. Here is the part that no one talks about enough. The year Rolling Acres Mall opened its doors, 1975, was the same year Goodyear shuttered Plant 1, its oldest and most iconic tire manufacturing facility in Akron. The city was building a cathedral of consumption. At the precise moment the paychecks that were supposed to fill it were disappearing. The factory workers who flocked to Rolling Acres on its opening day, the ones who browsed the aisles at Sears and sat down for dinner at York Steakhouse, many of them were living on borrowed time. Their jobs were already marked for elimination. Their neighborhoods were already beginning to thin. But in 1975, nobody was thinking about that. In 1975, a brand new mall on Romig Road felt like proof that Akron still had a future worth investing in. The bulldozers had flattened the bedrock, the concrete was poured, the anchor was signed. And on August 6th, the doors opened to a city that desperately wanted to believe that the best was still ahead. The man who willed Rolling Acres Mall into existence was not a celebrity developer or a Wall Street financier. Richard Buchholzer was an Akron businessman, local, connected, persistent. He had already proven himself with Chapel Hill Mall on the city's north side in 1967, working alongside Forest City Enterprises out of Cleveland. That project had been a success, but Chapel Hill was modest by comparison. What Buchholzer and Forest City had in mind for the Romig Road site was something far more ambitious. The largest, newest, and most modern enclosed shopping center in the entire Akron market. To design it, they brought in the Kiva J. Kext firm out of Cleveland, an architectural practice with a resume that already included Great Northern Mall and Richmond Mall. Kext's vision for Rolling Acres leaned into natural light and geometric drama. Massive angled skylights would cut across the roofline, flooding the interior corridors with daylight. At the junction of the main hallways, a large geometric sculpture would rise above a water fountain, giving the mall a visual center of gravity, a place where you instinctively stopped, looked up, and felt the scale of where you were. And then there was the elevator, not a standard box hidden behind a wall, but a glass bubble elevator, transparent, futuristic, visible from across the concourse. For a 5-year-old walking into Rolling Acres for the first time, that elevator was not a piece of infrastructure. It was a spaceship. The price tag for all of this ambition came to roughly $75 million, the equivalent of about $420 million in today's money. Construction required the relocation of 2 natural gas lines. Over 1,200 workers were involved in the build. Neighbors on Morse Street, half a mile from the site, heard dynamite going off for months as crews blasted through bedrock to lay the foundation. The earth itself had to be reshaped before the mall could exist. The project did not go smoothly. By mid-1973, City Councilman Ray Capper had grown frustrated with the pace of progress. He fired off a letter to Forest City Enterprises threatening to revoke the zoning permit entirely if construction did not accelerate. The threat was real enough to force a response. Forest City dispatched a representative named Mel Roebuck to present a written construction timeline and confirm that Sears had signed on as the first anchor, with J.C. Penney committed to follow. Capper withdrew his repeal. But the episode revealed something important. Even in the planning stages, Rolling Acres was a project that lived on the edge between ambition and uncertainty. It almost did not happen at all, but it did happen. On August 6, 1975, Rolling Acres Mall opened its doors. Sears anchored the east end. 21 other stores filled the corridors. Kinney Shoes, Claire's Boutique, Walden Books, Chess King, Tom McCann, The Limited, General Nutrition Center, Recordland, a Carousel snack bar. The scale was immediate. The newness was intoxicating. For a city that had spent the past several years watching factories close, here was something opening. Here was glass and light and the smell of fresh retail carpet and the hum of possibility. And Rolling Acres did not stop growing. By the end of 1975, the store count had already climbed past 50. J.C. Penney opened as a second anchor in 1976. That same year, General Cinema Corporation launched a 3-screen movie theater inside the mall, the Rolling Acres Cinemas, each auditorium seating 376. A new wing called the Court of Aquarius appeared in 1977, and with it came something no one expected in a shopping mall in northeastern Ohio, a real aquarium. Living fish, saltwater tanks, the quiet hum of filtration systems between storefronts. It was strange and wonderful, and it did not last long. The aquarium was removed after a short period, and today almost no photographs of it survive. But for the people who saw it, it was proof that Rolling Acres was trying to be something more than a place to buy socks. Montgomery Ward opened as a third anchor in October of 1977. Then in 1978, the Promenade Wing was added, a two-story expansion that brought Akron's own O'Neill's department store as the fourth anchor and introduced the food court, originally named the Prom and Eat. The mall even had an official mascot, the Friendly Giant, a Paul Bunyan-style character in a yellow shirt and red vest. His initials stood for Rolling Acres, but they also nodded to the Egyptian sun god Ra. The logo featured a sun rising over a valley. It was corny and earnest and completely of its time, a time when a shopping mall could name itself after a deity and nobody blinked. By the end of the 1970s, Rolling Acres Mall had 4 anchor stores, over 140 retail spaces, a movie theater, a food court, and an aquarium that already felt like a legend. It had taken barely 4 years to go from a Sears and 21 shops to a small city under a roof. The dream, by every measure that mattered in 1978, had come true. What nobody could see yet was how quickly a dream could start to curdle. There is a photograph from Christmas 1982 that tells you everything you need to know about what Rolling Acres Mall once was. The parking lot near the JCPenney entrance is packed, not a single empty space visible in the frame. Cars stretch to the edges of the asphalt. Inside, the corridors are shoulder to shoulder. Shopping bags swing from every hand. This was not a special event. This was a Tuesday in December. This was just what Rolling Acres looked like when it was alive. The 1980s were the golden years. By mid-decade, Rolling Acres had cemented itself as the most visited mall in all of Northeast Ohio, a region that included Cleveland, a city 5 times Akron's size. The pull was magnetic. Blue-collar families from Barberton drove up on Saturdays. Teenagers from Kenmore and West Akron treated it as their living room after school. Shoppers from as far as Canton and Medina made the trip because Rolling Acres had something the smaller plazas and strip malls could not offer. Everything in one place, under one roof, climate-controlled and fully lit and open for business. In 1986, the mall underwent a full interior renovation. The original earth tones, the browns and oranges that screamed 1970s, were stripped away and replaced with pastel colors. Soft pinks, light teals, muted lavenders. It was the 80s, and Rolling Acres wanted to look like it. That same year, Montgomery Ward closed its doors, but the vacancy did not last. Higbee's, a beloved Cleveland-based department store chain, moved in almost immediately. It was the 12th location in the Higbee's chain, and its first new store in over 4 years, a signal that the company saw Rolling Acres as a place worth investing in. 3 years later, O'Neill's merged into May Company, Ohio, and the name above the entrance changed, but the store kept running. The anchor lineup shuffled, but it never shrank. There was always someone ready to fill the space. By the early 1990s, the shuffling continued. Higbee's became Dillard's in 1992. May Company, Ohio became Kaufmann's that same year. These were not signs of weakness. They were the normal churn of corporate mergers and acquisitions that swept through American retail in that era. The stores changed names, but the lights stayed on, the registers kept ringing, and the customers kept coming. And then came Target. In October of 1994, construction began on the 5th and final anchor store, connected to the mall by a new 21,000-square-foot passageway. When Target opened in 1995, 98% of the mall's roughly 140 stores were occupied. Think about that number for a moment. 98%. In an industry where 10 to 15% vacancy was considered normal, Rolling Acres was essentially full. 5 anchors, over 140 tenants, 1.3 million square feet of retail space. Parking for 7,500 automobiles. It was, by any measure, a colossus. But Rolling Acres was never just about the shopping. That is the part that the economic data cannot capture. The mall was where things happened. The Akron Youth Symphony Orchestra performed in its corridors. Family festivals drew crowds that spilled from one wing to the next. An episode of the PBS children's show Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego was filmed there, a moment of minor national television fame that made the mall feel like it belonged to something larger than Akron. Girl Scout troops set up cookie tables near the entrances in the spring. Santa Claus held court near the fountain every December, and the line to see him wound past storefronts that had hung tinsel from their ceiling tiles. For the surrounding businesses along Romig Road, the mall was an economic engine. Restaurants, gas stations, car dealerships, smaller retail plazas. They all fed off the traffic that Rolling Acres generated. When the mall thrived, the entire corridor thrived. The relationship was symbiotic and, for a long time, seemingly unbreakable. Target's arrival in 1995 was celebrated as proof that Rolling Acres still had pulling power. The company even tailored its merchandise mix specifically for the local market, stocking more cosmetics, fashion, and music to reflect the demographics of the surrounding neighborhoods. It was a gesture of respect, an acknowledgement that Rolling Acres served a community, not just a customer base, and that community deserved to see itself on the shelves. No one standing in that newly opened Target in 1995, scanning the full parking lot and the bustling corridors beyond the connector hallway, would have believed that this was as good as it would ever get, that the peak had already arrived, that the highest point and the beginning of the descent were the same moment. But that is exactly what happened. 98% occupancy, 5 anchors, 140 stores. And from that point forward, Rolling Acres Mall would never add another tenant, never open another wing, never host another expansion. The only direction left was down. The mall just did not know it yet. Close your eyes for a moment and walk through the main entrance. The automatic doors part and the air hits you. That specific mall air, cooled and recirculated, carrying the faint ghost of popcorn from the cinema and something sweet and waxy from the candle shop 2 storefronts down. The floor beneath your feet is polished tile. The ceiling above you opens into those enormous geometric skylights, and the natural light pouring through them makes the whole corridor glow in a way that fluorescent tubes never could. Somewhere ahead you hear the splash of the fountain. Somewhere behind you a mother is telling her kid to stop running. You are inside Rolling Acres Mall. It is a Saturday afternoon in 1987. You have nowhere to be and no reason to leave. The fountain was the first thing most people remember. It sat at the intersection of the main corridors, surrounded by orange-tiled walls, and it was the unofficial center of gravity for the entire building. Kids flicked pennies into the water and made wishes that they would forget by the time they reached the food court. Teenagers leaned against the railing and pretended not to be watching each other. Parents used it as a meeting point. I will be at the fountain at 3. Because in the age before cell phones you needed a landmark, and the fountain was the one everyone knew. From there, the mall unfolded in every direction. Walk east and you passed Claire's, where 11-year-old girls agonized over earring selections that cost $3 and felt like the most important decision of their lives. Tom McAn was nearby, the shoe store where mothers dragged sons for back-to-school loafers every August, and where sons dragged their feet across the carpet in silent protest. Walden Books smelled like fresh paper and binding glue, and you could stand in the aisle reading for 20 minutes without anyone asking you to buy something. Chess King had the clothes that your parents did not understand. Skinny ties, parachute pants, shirts with patterns that looked like someone had spilled geometry across the fabric. Recordland was where you bought your first cassette tape, and if you were lucky, the clerk behind the counter told you what else you should be listening to. Walk west and the corridor opened into the promenade, the 2-story wing that housed the food court. The Prom and Eat had been renamed Picnic Place by 1981, but the function never changed. It was the cafeteria of a community that did not have a cafeteria. Boardwalk fries sent the smell of hot grease and vinegar drifting into the hallways. Der Dog House served hot dogs to construction workers on lunch breaks. Families with 3 kids and a budget sat at molded plastic tables and split meals and called it dinner out. The noise in the food court was a specific frequency, the clatter of trays, the hiss of soda fountains, a dozen conversations overlapping into a warm, indistinct hum that somehow felt like belonging. Upstairs, the glass bubble elevator was the attraction that no child could resist. You pressed the button and waited, and when the doors opened, you stepped into a transparent capsule that rose slowly above the concourse, giving you a god's-eye view of the shoppers below. It was not fast. It was not efficient. but it made you feel like you were inside the future. And for a kid in Akron, Ohio in 1983, the future was the most thrilling place you could imagine. The cinema was another world entirely. 3 screens, 376 seats each, operated by General Cinema Corporation. The floors were sticky, the popcorn was oversalted, the previews ran too long. None of that mattered. You paid your money and sat in the dark, and for 2 hours the mall disappeared and you were somewhere else. A jungle, a spaceship, a courtroom, a love story. When the credits rolled and you walked back out into the bright corridor, the transition felt physical, like surfacing from deep water. And then there was York's Steakhouse, where families went for sit-down dinners that felt like occasions even though they were just Tuesday nights. The waitresses knew the regulars. The steaks came on sizzling plates. A kid could order a Shirley Temple and feel sophisticated. These are not extraordinary memories. That is precisely the point. Nobody went to Rolling Acres Mall to witness history. They went to buy shoes, eat French fries, kill time, meet a friend, avoid the rain, hold a hand, return a blouse, and feel the simple comfort of being in a place that was designed, from its skylights to its fountain, to make you want to stay a little longer than you needed to. The remarkable thing about Rolling Acres is not that people shop there. It is that people live there, in small, ordinary, irreplaceable increments of time that they did not think to value until the place was gone. The first wound was self-inflicted, and almost nobody outside the mall's management office noticed it happen. In early 1991, Rolling Acres Mall quietly stopped hiring off-duty Akron police officers to patrol its corridors. The officers were expensive. Private security guards were cheap. On paper, the math was simple. In practice, the decision stripped the mall of trained law enforcement at the exact moment it needed them most, and replaced them with guards who were inexperienced and underpaid. It was the kind of cost-cutting move that saves money in January and costs everything by December. The consequences arrived within weeks. During a screening of the film New Jack City at the Rolling Acres Cinemas, a fight broke out between 2 moviegoers just outside the theater. Someone in the crowd believed they heard a gunshot. Whether a gun was actually fired has never been definitively settled, but it did not matter. Panic tore through the mall. People ran, through the food court, down the corridors, past storefronts where clerks watched in confusion and then fear. The stampede did not cause mass casualties, but it did something worse in the long run. It created a story. And in the life of a shopping mall, a story about danger is a wound that never fully heals. Word spread fast. Rolling Acres was not safe. The parking lot was a risk. The cinema attracted trouble. Friends told friends. Mothers warned daughters. The warnings were not always fair and they were not always accurate, but they were persistent, and persistence is all a reputation needs. The mall tried to respond. For a period, management even hired a mounted patrol unit, officers on horseback circling the property, hoping the visible presence would reassure shoppers. It did not work. The reputation had taken root, and no amount of horses could dig it out. General Cinema Corporation closed the 3-screen theater in mid-1993. Company representatives said the cinema had been unprofitable for years, too small to compete with the larger multiplex theaters springing up across the region. Before shutting down entirely, they had tried running it as a discount house, showing second-run movies for 99 cents a ticket. But the low price attracted long stays, and the theater became a gathering place for people who had nowhere else to go, homeless individuals, unsupervised teenagers, which only deepened the perception that Rolling Acres was losing control of its own spaces. The theater that had once been a destination, a place where you took a date or celebrated a birthday, closed not with a dramatic final screening but with a quiet calculation that it was no longer worth the electricity. Meanwhile, the competition was not standing still. In 1997, Summit Mall, located just a few miles away, completed a major renovation, new storefronts, updated interiors, a refreshed image. Shoppers who had been loyal to Rolling Acres suddenly had a cleaner, brighter, safer-feeling alternative. The Montrose shopping district farther north was growing aggressively as well, pulling national retailers out of the Romig Road corridor and into newer developments with better visibility and easier highway access. Kmart relocated from the Rolling Acres area to a new supercenter in Montrose. Other businesses followed. The ecosystem that had grown up around the mall, the restaurants, the gas stations, the smaller plazas, began to thin as the anchor that sustained them weakened. Inside the mall, the damage was becoming visible in the anchor stores themselves. In 1997, Dillard's, which had replaced Higbee's just 5 years earlier, downgraded its Rolling Acres location to a clearance center. The full-price merchandise was pulled, the racks filled with overstocked and returned goods. The message to shoppers was unmistakable: this store is no longer worth our best inventory. 2 years later, JCPenney followed the same path, converting its Rolling Acres location to a catalog outlet store. Employees told the Akron Beacon-Journal that sales had been declining for years before the conversion. It was only the third time in JCPenney's entire history that a full-line store had been downgraded to an outlet, a distinction that said more about Rolling Acres' trajectory than any occupancy report ever could. Beneath all of these individual failures, there was a deeper current that no renovation or security contract could reverse. Akron itself was contracting. The rubber jobs had been gone for over a decade. The population was still falling. The blue-collar middle class that had filled Rolling Acres corridors on Saturday afternoons was shrinking, moving away, aging out, earning less. The customer base that the mall had been designed to serve was not just going elsewhere. It was disappearing. Forest City Enterprises, the company that had built Rolling Acres from bare rock and held it for a quarter century, was watching all of this. They had refinanced the mall in 1994 and invested in the food court renovation and the Target addition. But by the late 90s, the returns were diminishing and the outlook was grim. The company that had once believed enough in Akron's southwest side to blast through bedrock and pour $75 million into the ground was now quietly looking for the exit. They would find it soon. And when they walked away, they would take the last thread of stability that Rolling Acres Mall had left. In January of 2000, Forest City Enterprises did what it had been preparing to do for years. It sold Rolling Acres Mall to Bankers Trust of New York for $33.5 million. After 25 years of ownership, from the dynamite blasts that broke the bedrock to the Target ribbon cutting that marked the peak, the company that had built Rolling Acres walked away. The sale was not presented as an abandonment. Bankers Trust gave the mall a new logo, launched a website, and reopened the cinema under an independent group called Blind Squirrel Cinema. On the surface, it looked like a fresh start. Underneath, it was a transfer of a problem that no amount of rebranding could solve. By November of 2001, less than 2 years after paying $33.5 million, Bankers Trust was already searching for a buyer. The mall had 5 anchor stores on paper, but 35% of the inline stores sat empty, nearly double the national vacancy rate. The corridors that had once been shoulder to shoulder on a Saturday afternoon now had stretches where you could walk for 30 seconds without passing another person. The new logo and the new website had changed nothing about the parking lot, the aging infrastructure, or the reputation that continued to follow Rolling Acres like a shadow it could not outrun. In September of 2002, the Wichard family of Raleigh, North Carolina, purchased Rolling Acres Mall for $2.75 million. Read that number again. 2 years earlier, the mall had sold for $33.5 million. Now it went for less than the price of a modest suburban house in a coastal city. The Akron Beacon-Journal reported that the mall was roughly 65% occupied at the time of purchase. The same article noted something else, something that should have alarmed anyone paying attention. The Wichard family had a pattern. They bought struggling malls at rock-bottom prices, made no significant investment in revitalizing them, and either flipped them or watched them die. Many of their properties were ultimately demolished. Rolling Acres was not being rescued. It was being harvested. The results were immediate and predictable. Without investment in maintenance, leasing, or marketing, the remaining tenants began to leave. By July of 2003, occupancy had fallen to 50%. The names that had once given Rolling Acres its identity, KB Toys, Lane Bryant, Victoria's Secret, Walden Books, were gone. The storefronts they left behind sat dark, their gates pulled down, their signs removed, leaving blank fascias that looked like missing teeth in a jaw that was slowly falling apart. Then the anchors started to break. Target, the fifth anchor and the last addition the mall had ever made, pulled out in February of 2006. The store did not close. It relocated to Wadsworth, a suburb 30 minutes away. The distinction mattered. Target was not failing. It was choosing to be somewhere else. Dillard's followed 3 months later, closing its clearance center in August. In July of that year, Michael Mirharuni, operating through a company called Invest Commercial, purchased the entire mall for $1.6 million, half of what the Witchards had paid 4 years earlier. The property was now worth less than a single-family home in most American suburbs. Kaufmann's had become Macy's in September of 2006, part of a nationwide rebranding. For a brief moment, the name on the building carried a flicker of prestige. But the store was bleeding. Macy's closed the Rolling Acres location in early 2008, citing poor sales. 3 anchors gone in 2 years. The mall was losing its bones. What remained was a building that was slowly ceasing to function as a building. The roof leaked. Buckets were scattered across the corridors to catch rainwater falling through holes in the ceiling. The food court, picnic place where families had once split trays of boardwalk fries, sat virtually deserted. A security investigation revealed that a homeless man had been living inside a vacant store for at least a month, surviving on power bars and drinks stolen from the GNC fitness supply store. He had been there for weeks before anyone noticed. That detail alone tells you everything about what Rolling Acres had become. A man lived inside it, and the building did not care, because there was almost no one left to care. By the fall of 2008, 8 stores remained. 8, in a mall that had once held over 150. The owner had fallen behind on property taxes and utility bills. The power company threatened to disconnect service. Mall management made the announcement. The electricity would be shut off within days. There would be no phase closing, no farewell event, no final sale. The lights would simply go out. The last handful of small tenants packed what they could and left, and on October 31, 2008, Halloween night, the power was cut. Rolling Acres Mall went dark. The date felt less like a coincidence and more like a punchline the universe had been saving. The corridors that had once hummed with 10,000 voices fell silent. The fountain was dry. The skylights stared up at a sky that would soon start pouring rain through the cracks. Sears and the JCPenney outlet remained open on the periphery, accessible only through their exterior entrances, sealed off from the dead mall behind them like lifeboats floating beside a wreck they could not save. The building that had cost $75 million to construct, that had once been the most visited mall in Northeast Ohio, had been killed by a $130,000 electricity bill that its owner could not, or would not, pay. The death of Rolling Acres Mall was not the end of its story. In some ways, it was the beginning of an entirely different one. Darker, stranger, and far more famous than anything that had happened while the lights were still on. Sears held on until April of 2011. The JCPenney outlet lingered longer, rebranded in late 2011 as JC's 5-star outlets after SB Capital Group purchased JCPenney's remaining outlet locations nationwide. The new name changed nothing about the reality on the ground. The store closed in December of 2013, the last retail tenant to walk away from Rolling Acres. A Storage of America facility moved into the former Target space for a while. A recycling company called Pinnacle set up operations in the old Sears building. But these were tenants of convenience, not commitment. Businesses occupying cheap square footage in a corpse, not trying to revive it. Inside the sealed-off mall, the decay was accelerating at a pace that surprised even the people who had watched the decline up close. Once the skylights began to shatter, smashed by vandals, cracked by weather, neglected by owners who had stopped spending money on a building they no longer intended to save, the rain came in. And once the rain came in, everything else followed. Water pooled on the floors of the old cinema, soaking through layers of carpet and fallen ceiling tiles until the ground felt like stepping on wet sponges. Mold crept up the walls. Paint peeled in long strips. The geometric sculpture at the corridor junction, the one that had once made children stop and look up in wonder, stood surrounded by puddles and debris, A monument in a ruin that no one had declared a monument. The graffiti came next. Then the scrappers, men and sometimes teenagers who broke in to strip copper wiring, aluminum fixtures, anything that could be sold for a few dollars at a salvage yard. In April of 2011, a 26-year-old man was electrocuted while trying to steal copper from a power box outside the mall. He was so severely burned that dental records were required to identify his body. 7 months later, in November, police acting on a phone tip discovered the body of Timothy Kern of Massillon, Ohio, in a shallow grave behind the mall. Kern had been shot in the head. His death was later connected to Richard Beasley, a man who used Craigslist job listings to lure victims to remote locations and murder them. The case became nationally known as the Craigslist Killer Murders, and the discovery behind Rolling Acres cemented the mall's transformation in the public imagination. From a place where families ate dinner and children rode a glass elevator to a place where bodies were buried and men died stealing wire. It was around this time that Rolling Acres became genuinely famous. Not for what it had been, but for what it looked like now. Photographers and urban explorers began breaking in, navigating the flooded corridors and posting images online. The photographs were devastating and, in their own bleak way, beautiful. Shattered skylights framing gray Ohio skies, overgrown weeds pushing through cracks in the parking lot, storefront gates frozen half open as if the last person to leave had not bothered to finish locking up. YouTube documentaries with titles like Dead Mall and Abandoned Rolling Acres accumulated millions of views. Comment sections filled with people sharing their own memories. First jobs at the food court, first kisses near the fountain, first paychecks spent at Recordland. The ruin and the nostalgia fed each other. The worse the building looked, the more people remembered how good it had once been. The Black Keys, Dan Auerbach and Patrick Carney, both from Akron, put a photograph of the crumbling south entrance to the former Kaufmann's on the cover of their Gold on the Ceiling single in 2012. The image needed no caption. Anyone from Akron recognized it immediately, and anyone who did not recognized something else in it. The universal architecture of American failure, a department store entrance that could have been anywhere, in any city, in any state where a mall had outlived the economy that built it. Meanwhile, the legal wreckage dragged on. The owners had not paid property taxes since 2006. By 2013, the unpaid balance exceeded $1 million. The city of Akron began foreclosure proceedings, and after years of court battles and failed auctions, including an online auction in 2009 that attracted interest but not a single bid, ownership of the property transferred to the city. JCPenney signed its building over to Akron in 2016. The city now owned a ruin it had never wanted and could not afford to ignore. Demolition came in 2017. The wrecking crews worked through the summer, pulling down the corridors where the Akron Youth Symphony had once performed, the food court where families had once split meals, the passageway that had once connected 150 stores to a shared idea of what a community could look like on a Saturday afternoon. When the dust settled, only the former Sears building remained standing, and even that was living on borrowed time. Then came the plot twist that no documentary filmmaker could have scripted. In July of 2019, the city of Akron announced that Amazon had officially acquired the land. Construction began in September. A 640,000 square foot fulfillment center rose from the same ground where Rolling Acres had stood. In November of 2020, the facility opened. 1,500 jobs at $15 an hour, over $1 million in annual income tax revenue for a city that had been starving for both. The site that had once held a place where people came to browse and touch and choose now held a warehouse where algorithms determined what got packed into a box and loaded onto a truck. The shoppers had not disappeared. They had just stopped showing up in person. Rolling Acres Mall was not the first American mall to die. It was not the largest or the oldest or the most expensive. But it became the one people think of when they hear the words Dead Mall. Its photographs are the ones that circulate when someone writes an article about retail decline. Its corridors are the ones that appear in YouTube thumbnails with millions of views. Its name shows up in comment sections and Reddit threads and podcast episodes as a shorthand for something that goes far beyond one building in one city in northeastern Ohio. Rolling Acres became an icon, not because its story was unique, but because its story was everyone's. Every city in America has a Rolling Acres. Maybe the name was different. Randall Park, Owings Mills, Cloverleaf, Northgate, Dixie Square. Maybe the timeline was shifted by a few years in one direction or another. Maybe the anchor stores wore different names or the food court served different fries. But the arc was the same. A field became a construction site. A construction site became a dream. A dream became a gathering place. A gathering place became a habit. A habit became a memory, and a memory became a ruin. The specifics vary. The trajectory does not. What makes Rolling Acres worth telling as more than a local cautionary tale is what it reveals about the contract between a place and the people who use it. When Forest City Enterprises broke ground on Romig Road in 1973, they were not just building a shopping center. They were making an implicit promise to the neighborhoods of Barberton and Kenmore and West Akron, the promise that this place would be here, that it would be maintained, that it would be a reliable feature of daily life, the way a school or a church or a post office is a reliable feature of daily life. People organized their weeks around it. They arranged to meet friends at the fountain. They counted on the food court for a cheap dinner when money was tight. They brought their children there knowing that those children would bring their own children someday. The mall did not ask for that kind of trust, but it received it, because that is what happens when a place becomes woven into the ordinary texture of people's lives. And then the owners sold it, and then the new owners sold it again. And then the next owners stopped paying the taxes and let the roof leak and could not cover the electric bill. The promise was never formally revoked. It just evaporated, one decision at a time, made by people who had never flicked a penny into the fountain or bought back-to-school shoes at Tom McCann or eaten boardwalk fries on a plastic tray while their kids ran circles around the table. The people who killed Rolling Acres Mall did not hate it. They simply did not know it. It was a line on a spreadsheet, and when the line stopped performing, they moved on. This is not a story about the internet killing retail. That explanation is too clean, too simple, and it lets too many people off the hook. Rolling Acres was already in serious trouble before most Americans had ever heard of Amazon. Its decline was driven by something more tangled, a combination of deindustrialization that hollowed out the customer base, security decisions that damaged the mall's reputation, competition from renovated rivals that the ownership refused to match, and a carousel of absentee investors who treated the property as a financial instrument instead of a place where human beings spent their time. The internet accelerated a collapse that was already well underway. It did not cause it. What the internet did do, and this is the strange, bittersweet coda, was give Rolling Acres a second life as a symbol. The same technology that is often blamed for killing malls is the reason Rolling Acres is remembered at all. Without the urban exploration videos, the viral photographs, the community forums where strangers share memories of a building they visited 30 years ago, Rolling Acres would be what most dead malls become, a footnote in a local newspaper archive, forgotten by everyone except the people who lived nearby. Instead, it became the face of an entire chapter of American cultural history. The chapter where we built these enormous shared spaces, filled them with our ordinary lives, and then watched them fall apart because the economics shifted and nobody with the power to act cared enough to try. There is an Amazon fulfillment center on Romig Road now. 1,500 people work there. Packages move through it by the tens of thousands every day, sorted and scanned and loaded and shipped to doorsteps across the Midwest. It is, by every economic metric, a net positive for Akron. Jobs, tax revenue, activity on a site that had been a dead weight for over a decade. Nobody should mourn the ruin that stood there before. But it is worth asking what was lost in the transaction, because the answer is not nothing. A fulfillment center is a place where goods pass through. A mall, at its best, in its prime, was a place where people stayed. They lingered at the fountain. They wandered without a purchase in mind. They ran into neighbors they had not planned to see. They sat in a food court and watched strangers and felt, without thinking about it, that they were part of something. Not something grand, not something historic, just something shared. A public space dressed up as a private one, where the price of admission was nothing more than walking through the door. We do not build places like that anymore. And the question that Rolling Acres leaves behind, the one that outlasts the concrete and the steel and the memories of pennies sinking in an orange-tiled fountain, is not whether we should. It is whether we still remember how.